They say shame has a sound. In Kura village, it sounded like laughter. The kind that cuts deeper than any blade, the kind that follows you long after the sun goes down, echoing in your chest when you try to sleep. Before we go any further, can I ask you for one small favor? This story took me days to write, record, and edit. Every frame, every emotion, every sound. It costs you nothing to support me, but it truly means everything. Please, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and comment your location below. I want to know where my amazing viewers are watching from. I read every single comment, and I'll be giving shoutouts in my next video. Today's shoutout goes to Jennifer Clark from Brooklyn, Mamudu from Spain, and Teresa from Philadelphia. Now back to our story. Her name was Amina Danjuma, 18 years old, with eyes that had learned to hide tears before they could fall. She was an orphan, raised by hands that never held her gently. Every morning before the rooster crowed, while the world was still painted in shades of blue and shadow, she was already at the market, selling peppers under the unforgiving sun. The smell of ground chili clung to her fingers, stained her wrapper, became part of her skin. Every kobo she made went toward a debt she didn't create, a hospital bill from the night her mother took her last breath, whispering her name one final time. Aunt Hadiza and Uncle Bola called it charity. They called it mercy. But mercy doesn't wake you at 4 in the morning with a broom in your hand. Mercy doesn't make you sleep on a mat thinner than hope itself, in a corner that smells of old cooking oil and regret. The day Chief Esh came to the market, everything should have changed. He was a man of means, dressed in flowing agbada the color of fresh palm wine, gold watch catching the afternoon light like a promise. He saw Amina arranging peppers with careful hands, her movements precise despite the heat, and something in her quiet dignity caught his attention. He asked Mama Sophia, the old market woman with grey locks and knowing eyes, who the girl was. By evening, word had reached Uncle Bola's compound. A chief was interested, a real suitor, a way out for Amina. But Uncle Bola's hands were dirty, not with honest soil, but with the kind of dirt that stains your soul. He owed money to men who didn't forgive debts, men who didn't wait, men whose shadows fell long and cold. And a respectable marriage meant scrutiny, meant questions, meant people looking too closely at how he lived, what he owed, what he'd done. So Aunt Hadiza, with a tongue sharper than her conscience, began to whisper. She whispered that Amina stole from the market. She whispered that the girl was loose, untrustworthy, damaged. The rumors spread like wildfire in Harmattan season, carried on the wind from compound to compound. By the time Chief Esh sent his people to inquire formally, the answer was already poison. He withdrew his interest. He wanted no trouble. Amina never even knew he had asked. 3 days later, Uncle Bola made an announcement that turned her world to dust. She would marry a beggar, not a poor man, not a struggling trader, a beggar. The man who sat under the bridge on the Lagos road, the one people tossed coins to without looking at his face, without seeing him as human. His name was Keen Obi, and Uncle Bola had already accepted a bride price so small it was an insult to the very idea of marriage, barely enough to buy a bag of rice. Amina stood in the courtyard when he told her, the evening sun bleeding red across the sky. She said nothing. What could she say? She had no parents to run to, no brother to fight for her, no money to disappear with. Silence had kept her alive this long. Maybe it would keep her alive a little longer. The wedding happened on a Wednesday afternoon, when the heat was at its cruelest. Plastic chairs arranged under neem trees, dust swirling in the air like dirty smoke. Villagers came not to celebrate, but to witness, to mock, to confirm what they already believed, that Amina Danjuma was worth nothing more than this. She wore her mother's old wrapper, torn at the hem, faded from years of sun and washing. No jewelry, no henna patterns on her palms, no joy. Just a girl standing at the edge of her own burial, feeling the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on her shoulders. And then he arrived. Keen walked into that circle of scorn with layers of rags hanging from his shoulders, feet bare and dusty, face weathered by sun and street dust. But his eyes were different. Calm, kind, deep brown and steady. He looked at her not with pity, but with something she couldn't name. Something that made her chest tighten and her breath catch. The ceremony was fast. No imam, just an elder mumbling words that meant nothing to anyone there, his voice dry as the harmattan wind. When it was over, the villagers laughed louder. Uncle Bola pocketed his shame money, not meeting anyone's gaze. Aunt Hadiza turned her face away, and Amina followed a stranger down a dusty path toward a life she couldn't imagine. They walked in silence for an hour, past the market where the evening traders were packing up, past the mosque where the call to prayer drifted on the wind, past the last compound where firelight still glowed warm against the gathering darkness. The path narrowed. The air cooled. Crickets began their night song. And finally, they arrived. A shack. Zinc roof humming in the wind like a tired breath. Walls made of old wood and prayers and stubbornness. It sat alone by a dry riverbed, far from everything, surrounded by tall grass that whispered secrets to itself. Inside, there was a mat, a pot blackened by fire, a metal cup with a dent in the side. Nothing else. The space smelled of dust and loneliness. Amina stood in the doorway, and for the first time that day, her shoulders shook. Not with sobs. Just the quiet tremor of someone realizing how far they've fallen, how small the world can become. Keen spoke then, his voice low and steady, softer than she expected. He told her the mat was hers. He told her he would sleep outside unless the cold was too much. He told her she was safe. He said these words like they were a vow. She didn't believe him. How could she? But that night, listening to the wind move through the grass, she slept without fear. And that was something. The days that followed were strange. Keen didn't demand. He didn't command. He left at dawn, when the sky was still grey, and returned at dusk with enough coins for Gary, for salt, for palm oil, for survival. Amina, without being asked, began to turn the chaos of that shack into something like a home. She swept the floor until no dust remained. She patched the roof with old flour sacks, her fingers nimble and sure. She boiled water and made the small space smell like ginger and warmth and something almost like peace. One afternoon, a child appeared at the door. Thin, hungry, eyes too big for his face, ribs showing through his torn shirt. He asked for food, his voice barely a whisper. Amina had only a small bowl of gari soaked in water, her only meal until evening. She looked at the boy. She looked at the bowl, at the steam rising from it. Then she split it in half and handed him the larger portion, watching him eat like he hadn't seen food in days. Keen saw it. He had just returned, standing in the doorway. He said nothing, but something shifted in his face, a softness around his eyes. Another day, she noticed his slippers were falling apart, barely holding together with hope and thread. She didn't ask him for new ones. Instead, she used scraps of old cloth and twine, sitting in the evening light as the sun painted everything gold, stitching them back together with careful hands. When she placed them by the mat, Keen picked them up and stared at them for a long time, turning them over like they were made of something precious. Then he looked at her, and his voice cracked just slightly when he said thank you. Just those 2 words, but they carried weight. The night the storm came, the roof began to leak. Water poured through the zinc in cold streams, drumming loud, soaking the floor. Amina didn't wake him. She took her own wrapper, the one her mother had worn, still carrying the faint scent of her, and held it against the roof, standing on a wooden crate, letting the water soak her instead, her arms aching, her body shivering, so the mat where Keen slept would stay dry. He woke to find her like that, drenched, stubborn, teeth chattering. He pulled her away from the roof, covered her with his own rags, and for the first time, Amina cried in front of him. Not from sadness. From something she'd forgotten existed. Kindness. Pure and simple and real. He held her while the storm raged, and he whispered, "You don't have to carry everything alone." She whispered back, through tears, "I don't know any other way." "Then I'll teach you," he said. And he meant it. They began to talk after that. Small things at first. He taught her to read numbers, to count change, to recognize cheating traders by the way they held coins. She taught him how to start a fire without smoke, how to find clean water when the well ran dry, how to survive on almost nothing. They laughed. Quietly, like people who'd forgotten how, like it was a language they were relearning together. But they laughed. And then Zubi came. Uncle Bolla's nephew, loud and cruel, with a swagger that covered up cowardice and breath that reeked of cheap gin. He arrived at the shack one evening with 2 other young men, their shadows long and threatening in the fading light, demanding money. He called it a levy. He called it respect. But it was extortion, plain and simple, the kind that feeds on fear. Amina stood in the doorway and said no. One word, clear and strong. Zubi's face twisted, his eyes going dark. He stepped forward, fist already forming, and Keen, without a word, moved between them. They beat him, not because he fought back, because he didn't. He took every blow in silence, protecting her, his body a shield, until they got bored and left, laughing as they walked away into the darkness. Amina knelt beside him in the dirt, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the cloth, and cleaned his wounds with water and torn fabric. Her tears fell onto his bruised skin, mixing with the blood, and she whispered something she never thought she'd say to anyone. She whispered that she was sorry. Sorry she had nothing. Sorry he was suffering because of her. Keen reached up and touched her face, his fingers gentle despite the pain, despite everything. He told her she had given him everything. Everything that mattered. She didn't understand, but she felt it, deep in her chest where hope had started to grow. There were other signs, small and strange. His hands were too soft for a beggar, the palms uncalloused. His posture too straight, his shoulders back even in rags. When he slept, he sometimes murmured words that didn't fit, words like strategy and margins and acquisition, business terms that had no place in a shack by a dry riverbed. Once, she caught him sketching something in the dirt, patterns and numbers and diagrams that looked like a language she didn't know, complex and precise. She never asked. If he was hiding something, it was his to keep. She had learned long ago that some truths arrive only when they're ready. Then one morning she woke up, and he was gone. No note. No word, no goodbye, just absence, cold and complete. 1 day passed, then 2, then 3. The shack felt emptier than it ever had before. Amina kept the shack clean. She cooked his portion of food and set it aside, covered with a cloth, just in case. She told herself he would return. She told herself he wouldn't leave her like this. Not after everything. But doubt is a heavy thing, and by the 3rd night, it was crushing her, stealing her breath. On the 4th morning, the village exploded with noise. Black SUVs rolled into Kura like a storm made of metal and glass, engines purring like lions, kicking up dust that glowed gold in the morning sun. Villagers poured into the square, eyes wide, mouths open, voices rising in confusion and wonder. Out of the lead vehicle stepped a man in a tailored suit the color of midnight, clean-shaven, shoulders back, presence like thunder rolling across the sky. It was Keen. Except it wasn't. This man was Kenneth Obiora, billionaire, tech mogul, real estate king. The kind of name that appeared in newspapers and on billboards in Lagos, the kind of man who moved markets with a word. And he was walking through Kura village like he owned the very dust beneath his feet. The villagers gasped. Whispers turned to shouts, voices overlapping in disbelief. Uncle Bola went pale, his face the color of ash. Aunt Hadiza clutched her wrapper like it could save her, her hands trembling. And Amina, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt her heart stop, then restart with a painful thud. He saw her. Across the chaos, across the noise and the bodies, he saw her. And he walked toward her, slowly, deliberately, like a man approaching something sacred, his eyes never leaving her face. When he reached her, he asked if they could speak. Alone. His voice was different now, polished but still carrying that gentleness she remembered. They walked to the edge of the village, away from the eyes and the noise and the judgment, to a place where the wind carried only truth and the scent of dry grass. Kenneth told her everything. He told her he had left Lagos because he was drowning, not in poverty, but in poison. Everyone wanted something from him. Every smile had a price. Every friend had an angle, every conversation a transaction. He couldn't tell who loved him and who loved his money. So he disappeared. He became Keen. He chose the hardest test he could think of, poverty and ridicule, to find someone real, someone good, someone who saw the man, not the bank account. And he found her. Amina listened in silence, her face unreadable, her arms crossed against her chest. The wind moved her wrapper. When he finished, she didn't speak right away. The wind filled the space between them, heavy with words unsaid. Finally, she looked at him, her voice steady but edged with something raw, something hurt. "You tested me," she said quietly, "like I was an experiment." "I tested myself," he replied, his voice breaking slightly, "and I failed. Because I should have trusted you with the truth sooner." She told him she understood why he did it. She told him loneliness makes people do desperate things. But she also told him it wasn't fair. She had been real because she had no choice. He had been hidden because he chose to be. That wasn't the same. That wasn't equal. Kenneth's face broke. He nodded, swallowing hard. He asked for forgiveness, and his voice carried genuine regret, the kind that comes from seeing your own mistakes clearly. And then he offered her a choice. He would annul the marriage. He would pay for her schooling, set her up with everything she needed, a life of her own choosing, and walk away. Disappear again, this time for good. Or they could start over, properly, on her terms, with no more secrets, no more shadows, no more tests. Amina looked at the man who had taught her to laugh again, the man who had taken a beating for her without hesitation, the man who, beneath all the rags and all the wealth, had seen her when no one else did, really seen her. She had one condition. She wanted the truth about her parents, about the fire that took them, about why Uncle Bola had raised her with such cold indifference. Kenneth didn't hesitate. He made a call right there, his phone gleaming in the sun. Within days, his legal team uncovered what Uncle Bola had buried for years, hidden under layers of lies and forged papers. The fire that killed Amina's parents wasn't an accident. It was arson, staged to look like one, set in the dead of night while they slept. Uncle Bola had forged documents, claimed insurance money, and used it to pay off debts to dangerous men. Her parents had died for his greed, for his weakness, for his unwillingness to face his own failures. When the police came for Uncle Bola, he didn't run. He couldn't. His legs wouldn't carry him any more. Aunt Hadiza collapsed in the doorway, weeping not for her husband, but for her own silence, for years of knowing and saying nothing. She had known. She had always known. The village watched as justice, cold and final, took root. Amina stood in front of Aunt Hadiza one last time. The older woman begged for forgiveness, hands trembling, voice shattered, tears streaking her face. Amina looked at her for a long time, studying the woman who had raised her without love. Then she spoke, her voice calm. She said forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending the pain never happened. It meant choosing not to carry hate, because hate was heavy and she was tired of carrying heavy things. But it also meant boundaries. Aunt Hadiza would never be part of her life again. Never. She turned and walked away, her steps lighter than they'd ever been, the weight finally lifting from her shoulders. Kenneth was waiting. She found him standing by the dry riverbed, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon where the sky met the earth in shades of orange and pink. She walked up beside him, feeling the evening breeze cool on her skin, and without looking at him, she said it. Justice is done. Now I choose my future, and I choose truth with you. He turned to her, and for the first time since she'd known him, Kenneth Obiora looked unsure, vulnerable, almost afraid. He knelt in the dust. No cameras, no audience, no performance. Just a man and a woman and the wind and the truth between them. He asked her properly. He asked if she would marry him again, not as Keen the beggar or Kenneth the billionaire, but as the man who wanted to spend his life learning her kind of strength, her kind of grace. She said yes. The wedding happened 2 months later. It wasn't gold and white. It wasn't magazine covers and champagne towers and designer gowns. It was an evening ceremony in a quiet courtyard, lit by calabash lanterns that glowed warm like captured stars, the sound of talking drums filling the air with rhythm and life. Mama Sophia, the market woman who had always seen Amina's worth, led the blessing. She spoke of hands that build homes, not from brick and mortar, but from mercy and patience and love that chooses to stay. Kenneth's vows were simple. He said he had mistaken wealth for wisdom. He said Amina had taught him that both were empty without mercy, without seeing people as people, not as transactions. Amina's vows were simpler. She said she once believed survival was silence. Now she knew it was voice, dignity, and love. It was choosing to speak truth even when truth was hard. After the ceremony, they announced something new. Second Rain House, a boarding and scholarship program for orphans and housegirls, children who had no voice, no choice, no chance. It would be built in Kura, on the land where Amina's parents had once lived, where their memory would finally mean something beautiful. Aunt Hadiza, broken and quiet, asked if she could work in the kitchen. Not for redemption. Not for forgiveness. Just to do something right for once in her life. Amina allowed it. Not because she had to. Because she could. Because mercy was a choice, and she chose it. The first rain of the season came that evening, soft and steady, drumming on roofs and soaking the thirsty earth. Amina stood in the courtyard, and Kenneth handed her something. Her mother's old umbrella, torn and mended and still standing, the fabric patched but whole. She opened it, the metal frame creaking slightly, and he stepped beneath it with her, their shoulders touching. They didn't hide from the rain anymore. They chose it. because it was the rain that had watered their roots, that had made things grow in places where nothing should have survived. And from those roots, something beautiful had grown. In Kura village, shame once had a sound. But now, if you listen closely, you'll hear something else. You'll hear laughter, the kind that heals, the kind that lasts, the kind that comes when two people choose truth over comfort, and love over everything else. That's the story of Amina and Kenneth, the girl who had nothing, and the man who had everything, and the life they built when they finally found each other in the only place that mattered, the truth. Before you go, if this story touched your heart, please do one thing for me. Hit that like button so more people can see it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Every view, every comment, every share keeps stories like this alive.